Hi everyone, welcome back to the channel. I wanted to do some more analysis, but do something a little bit different from what I've been covering so far. I wanted to focus in this video on one of Bach's keyboard preludes, and this is the first prelude in C major from the first Well-Tempered Clavier book. It's a really well-known piece. I think most of you are going to be familiar with it. If you're watching this video, you probably know this piece. And I wanted to look at it because, of course, it's very well known. People have analyzed it, I think, to death. And what they usually do is analyze the harmonies from measure to measure. And that would make sense. And I think that's worth doing because the piece is mostly made up of these arpeggiated figures. And the harmony changes really measure to measure. The piece is relatively short. It's 35 measures long. And I know there's a little bit of debate over some editions that have 36 measures. There has been an extra measure added between, I believe it's measures 22 and 23. I think that was done by an editor. And at this point, most scholarship, I think, believes that the extra measure shouldn't be there. And so I'm going to go with that. I'm not going to deal with a 36 measure. I'm going to just talk about the piece with the 35 measures. And this is what you're looking at is the Urtext edition. Now, the last three measures of the piece are cadential. So Bach sort of gets out of that arpeggiated figure that he has set up through most of the piece. And I think it's worth analyzing the harmony in this, most certainly. The first measure, you can look at the outline of a C major triad. And then in the second measure, the notes do change, but the bass stays the same. So you could analyze that as a D minor 7 chord in third inversion because the C's in the bass. The third measure looks to be a G7 chord with the B in the bass, so that would be a first inversion 7 chord, G7 chord, which makes sense because you're in the key of C major. I think that's absolutely worth doing, and it's useful in some regard. But I wanted to look at it from a different point of view. I think what's really amazing about this piece is the way Bach uses common chord tones from measure to measure. There's this really neat gradual transformation as the piece moves along. And what it looks like he's doing, to me at least, is he's hanging on oftentimes to certain chord tones, and then the other notes around those chord tones that he's holding on to or repeating change. And so this effect is really it's really beautiful, and I think it's worth exploring. So what I decided to do in my analysis is I looked at, let me get my pen out here. There we go. I looked at the first 5 notes of each measure, at least up to measure 32, because each measure, the arpeggiated figures repeat, and if I'm just looking at common tones, I really only need to look at the first 5 notes. So in the first measure, from low to high, you get a C, an E, and then G, C, E, okay, C major triad. The second measure, you still have the C in the bass, and then it steps up to a D, and then A, F, A, D, and F in the second measure, and I think you get the point. I took those 5 notes in each measure, and I plotted them out. I charted them out because I wanted to see the notes that he was hanging on to, and see if I can find any thing that's useful in terms of analysis or understanding what Bach is doing. So my chart is here, and so from left to right, that's the lowest note, and then the ascending notes are indicated. So the first measure from low to high is C, E, G, C, C, E, G, C, E, and then the second measure C, D, A, D, F, third measure B, D, G, D, F. I hope that makes sense. And then in the red, what I've tried to do, or what I've done, is I've highlighted the note that he's hanging on to, or the common chord tone between the measures. So from the first to the second measure, the only note that he hangs on to is the bass note, C. And in the second measure, he actually hangs, from the second to the third measure, he actually hangs on to 3 notes the D, the octave higher D, and then the F on top into the third measure. Okay, and then from the third measure, he hangs on to the middle note G into the fourth measure, and you can see how many common tones Bach uses in this piece. It's pretty amazing. Now, in digging into these common chord tones and how Bach's using them, I noticed a few things that I think are worthy of mentioning. Most of the time, Bach doesn't hang on to the same chord tone for more than two measures. He usually changes. Okay, so it's not like he's just sitting on one note and then changing the chord tones on top or below it and just continuing that for numerous measures. He usually only has the common tone last for two measures and then he changes. Okay, there are some instances where he does hang on to the chord tone for more than two measures, and they are as follows. Starting in the fourth measure through the sixth measure, the lowest note is used, the C is repeated through three measures, and then in measures 8, 9, and 10, the C gets repeated for three measures, and then in measures 16, 17, and 18, the top voice is an F, it gets repeated for three measures, and hopefully you get the idea. In the top voice from 18, 19, measures 18, 19, and 20, the E is repeated for three measures. And then, let's see, where else? In the middle, the second to the highest note of the arpeggiated figure, in measures 19, 20, 21, 22, and 23, for 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 5 measures, the C is repeated a whole bunch of times. And there's a few more spots. Starting in measure 24, the G in the bass is repeated a lot. Looks to be 8 times. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. That's a lot. The G in the bass, he just keeps repeating that note. Okay, and then in the middle voice in measure 24, the G is repeated 4 times, and then also in measures 29 to 32, the G again is repeated 4 times. Okay, so what's significant about that? Well, here's what I see. The only times, I shouldn't say the only times. Most of the times, Bach is only keeping a chord tone through 2 measures. If he keeps the chord tone for more than 2 measures, 3 or more, it's most of the time, it's either the notes C, E, or G. Okay, which are the notes of the tonic triad? That would make sense, right? There's lots of C's, there's lots of E's, and there's lots of G's. Okay, I think that's significant. There is one instance in the upper voice in measures 16, 17, and 18 where he repeats the F 3 times. And so this is something that I think is worth noting. If you look at measures 16, 17, and 18, you get this F repeated 3 times, but it mirrors what happens in measure 8, 9, and 10. It's the same. 16, 17, 18, and 8, 9, and 10. If you look at measure 8, what do you have? Well, you have a C major triad, major 7 triad in third inversion because the B's in the bass. So C major 7, C, M-A-G, M-A-J, 7. And then in measure 9, you get what looks to be an A minor 7 chord in root position. So A, M, 7. And then in measure 10, you get a D dominant 7 chord in root position, so D7. And then, of course, in measure 11, it moves to a G chord, fine. Sorry, let's get rid of that line. And then in measure 16, what do you get? Well, he's in the subdominant here. He instead of being on a C major 7 chord, he's in 16. It's an F major 7 chord. F. Let me erase this so it looks a little easier to see. So F major 7 in third inversion, just like you get in measure 8 on the C major 7 in third inversion. In measure 17, what do you get here? Well, you get a D minor 7 chord in root position. It's analogous to measure 9, A minor 7 chord in root position. And then in measure 18, what do you get here? You get a G dominant 7 chord in root position, okay? And just like you have in measure 10 with the D dominant 7 chord in root position. Worth mentioning, measure 10, D dominant 7 goes to where you'd expect it to go, G major in measure 11. And then in measure 18, the G7 chord, where does it go? It goes to a tonic triad. It goes to a C chord in root position. So common tones, I think it's worth exploring. Yes, you can go through and analyze each measure, and yeah, probably that's useful. I'm even doing it here. But what's really happening in this music? It's these common notes that Bach's using to transform the chords, and it's subtle and it's really beautiful. And so I hope that's helpful. Please feel free, leave me a comment if you agree with my analysis on this. I'd like to hear about it. So that's it for now. Take care, and I'll see you next time.